Hey everybody, welcome back to the Nidus Anarchy series. I'm your host, Adam, CIO, co-founder of Nidus, and today I have Hakan from Berlin. Thank you very much. We're going to be talking about decentralized and self-sovereign IDs. You are going to be at the EIC Berlin conference,
That's
I'm
correct.
really so thank you for coming on to the show. I will be out there as well. I just got confirmation yesterday that I will be there doing coverage of the event live and everything. So I'll be able to meet you in person. So that's pretty exciting.
Fantastic. Looking forward
Yes.
to.
But yeah, so why don't you tell me a little bit about your background and how you're tied into the whole decentralized self-sovereign ID?
Yeah, sure. So, my getting into decentralized ID was a bit of an interesting one because I actually wanted to work in the area of blockchain. Since I heard about Bitcoin in 2012 and reading the white paper, rereading it and rereading it, and finally understanding what it is about, I was really intrigued by the whole concept and how at that point I thought it's going to change or revolutionize the world. And yeah, applied to a more technical position at the Technical University of Berlin, and I have been given the opportunity to work on a blockchain project. At least that's what the
Oh,
professor at that time told me. But actually, it ended up being a decentralized identity project with some blockchain and DLT inside of it. So basically, just the verifiable data registry, right? Like that's the source of truth. But the rest of the stuff, as you also know, is basically 95% of what an SSI is. So therefore, I ended up doing very, very little blockchain, and on top of it, got some skills in the area of digital identities, especially decentralized identities. Yeah,
nice. Very
and
cool.
my background in that area was also I started with a project called ID Union, which is a state-funded project in Berlin, one of the four showcase projects related to creating secure digital identity solutions for citizens and residents of Germany.
Mhm.
And all of these proposals that came at that point were really going for self-sovereign identity concept. The technology stack that the ID Union utilized, or utilized back then, now it changed a bit, but at that point, it was going for the Hyperledger Indy and Hyperledger Aries technology stack with Aries Cloud Agent Python being the issuer and verifier agents and using .NET framework for the wallets to store credentials and present them in a given stage. Yeah, so from there on, I also worked heavily in that project for around like 2-3 years and started to evolve a bit further in the area, more going towards to the European blockchain service infrastructure and the technology stack that was over there, which is basically the OpenID for verifiable credential protocol family, using the W3C credentials, verifiable credentials instead of anon creds. And yeah, from there on, I moved actually to Accenture as a decentralized identity architect
Wow.
and have been working on some reference architectures that we can show to our clients to work on their decentralized identity needs, mapping their capabilities and offering them solutions based on that. And yeah, like currently, what my current focus is actually a bit further away from the whole stack that I was mentioning there, which is more the area of automotive data spaces.
Mhm.
Working currently for the Catena X, the automotive data space operating company called Confinity X, where they also use decentralized identities, but in a different use case, which is the organizational ID. And even a further fringe use case, an organizational ID that is being used in machine-to-machine transactions. So there's actually no human interaction in there.
Oh,
They're
wow.
using self-sovereign identity, but at the same time, how can a machine be sovereign, right? Like, is a
Right.
machine saying that they accept it? Do they consent to the use of these credentials or like presenting their credentials, etc.? So it's a different area. It's a very interesting area as well, but also one of the less probed areas of decentralized digital identity, I would say.
So how, so for server to server, machine to machine, self-sovereign, how is it different than just like a certificate or PKI based authentication or trust?
Right. So um, It is to a certain extent different in the way that there can also be, first of all, multiple issuers, which you might also say this is the same thing with the PKI and X549 certificates. But the X549 certificates don't really give you the necessary authorization information as well, whereas the verifiable credentials have these attributes and credential types that can, based on the policy of the verifier, enable them to access certain parts of some services or data in that case. And this is where the decentralized identity is being utilized, basically.
So we kind of mentioned this a little before we started the podcast here. We're just kind of talking about how Europe has surpassed the US when it comes to decentralized self-sovereign ID use. We're right now, the biggest things, like I'm about to go to Identiverse here just a couple weeks, right, in Vegas, a week before EIC. I guarantee you the conversation is going to be about passwordless. Like, oh, we're going to use QR codes to sign in and all these other different ways for passwordless authentication, because that's where everyone's trying to push and move to right now, is passwordless. Europe has just said, forget passwordless. We're going to go all straight to, decentralized ID, self-sovereign ID. And you even isn't there even European either laws or mandates in place to kind of, I don't want to say force it, but maybe force? I don't know. Can you shed some light on that a little?
Sure. So Europe has a regulation called Electronic Identification and Authentication Services, in short EIDAS or EIDAS, which has been out there since 2014, which was to make sure that the citizens can use their online identifications in a secure manner to authenticate to our service providers to be granted to access goods and services. Which wasn't necessarily based on any kind of verifiable credentials, because back then there was none. It was based on the EID functionalities and qualified electronic signatures and seals for companies. And currently, what happened in the Europe for the past 3 to 4 years was a massive move towards the area of verifiable credentials and decentralized identities. And to that extent, the EIDAS regulation has also been extended to also add additional trust services, which are called qualified electronic attestation of attributes, which is basically the capability to have a form of verifiable credential. It can be in MDoc format or in an SDJ, selective disclosure for JSON Web Token format, to be a legally binding identifiable information about a person, which they can use to, I don't know, do some shopping or do their e-government business, open up a bank account, etc. So this is a quite fresh development. I mean, it has been in the doing already, but now it has been voted, now it has been passed, and now what is happening is the implementing act is coming on. Like when the next couple of years, all EU member states will start to implement these changes and offer these solutions, and therefore there are also a couple of other work streams going on. I don't know how detailed we want to go into this topic right now, but
that's totally up to you. I mean, I would say most people that are watching this will be probably pretty technical, but it's whatever you want. Whatever you feel like talking about.
Cool. So, I mean, there was a couple of work streams happening here as well, right? Like the one thing that was happening is like, okay, so EIDAS 2.0 extension, how do we do this? For that purpose, there was a work stream that was going on for the architecture reference framework. So where the regulation itself is like not a technical document, it says what should be done. The tech side of the things have been defined in the architecture reference framework, which has been worked in the Europe as well. And on top of it, there was another work stream going on because now we're talking about online identification. All these ID cards, physical ID cards that we have also a chip, right? And the question is more about in that area, how can we bind these ID card data in a mobile wallet in a secure way? And this is something called the PID in Europe, which is the personal identification data. And all these different member states have also slightly different working ID cards.
Oh, that's annoying.
And yeah, so for that reason, there are also not only on the Europe level that is a work going on, but also on a national level in each of these countries to
Wow.
support this personal identification data to be stored securely as a either MDoc format or the SD-job format for further uses, whichever they might be.
So what type of software are you seeing being used from the client side, like for their wallet? Like, is it like for one of the big problems I'm seeing here in the state side, let me just put it this way, is these decentralized identity companies are coming like, oh, look, we're doing decentralized identity. They're really meaning verifiable credentials. And then you have to use their wallet. And then you have to pay a subscription fee to use their wallet for the enterprise. But to me, like I came like from you, the background of blockchain, which is it's a wallet. It should be open. You shouldn't be bound to anything. It should be decentralized. So what are you seeing in actual use cases out in Europe right now for that?
So I think you are referring to two different topics, but from a different angle. The one of them is the login into an ecosystem.
Correct.
Which was the earlier implementations. I must agree also, like I mentioned, I'm coming from the background of Hyperledger Indian Aries, even though there are some different vendors that they're going for wallet implementations or issuance and verification services. At the same time, you're really bound with the Aries framework, also due to the fact that, for example, AnonCreds is something which is really complicated to implement if you're not using the libraries offered by the Hyperledger Foundation. So therefore, there are these like little ecosystems that have been formed. I think the direction that is going is like, it's not as strict as it was before. Many of these frameworks are also offering multiple different technology stacks. For example, if you're looking into the Aries JavaScript framework, which is I think now it's called Aries Credo, hosted by Open Wallet Foundation, is actually offering not only the DITCOM-based communication or credential exchange protocols like Aries Present Proof Issue Credential, but at the same time OpenID for verifiable credential protocol family. So once you have the credential in your wallet using that framework, you can actually either get issued different types of credential formats and in different types of credential exchange formats. And also do the same thing for the presentation part. And also, I think the development that is also going on in the area of interoperability profiles are also eliminating the necessity to have these islands of ecosystems, because they're like very well specified in terms of like what kind of protocols are supposed to be used and how these protocols are supposed to be used as well, because sometimes protocols are very, very broadly written, as you might also know. For example, if you look into the VC data model, there's anything and everything in there. But what of these, which of these key value pairs are going to be used in the credential? It could be a part of like the profile, interoperability profile, but not only from the credential format side of the things, but also all the other underlying parts, right? The type of the credential format that you're going to use, what kind of exchange protocol that you're going to use, and which configuration you're going to have in the exchange protocol. So that's one side of the things. But on the other hand, to your question, there is also the conversations that we are having about, for example, device binding to the credential, that you are generating some private key pairs in your hardware security model in the secure enclave of iPhone, for example, and having a wallet attestation to prove the authenticity that the wallet is configured in the right way, and utilizing the HSM to generate these public key pairs, so that the credentials that are going to be issued, which is mandatory to be bound to the device itself, in order to be compliant with the level of assurance high, so that these credentials cannot be migrated. So in that area, we're really seeing that, okay, no matter what kind of wallet you're using, you are bound with that wallet, because you cannot, you don't have any data portability anymore at that point for these high level of assurance credentials at least. So I think it's also a question of like the ideology of like how it started,
Mhm.
and the reality or the necessity of the practicality coming in and shaping the
Like what the adoption actually
paradigm.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, or the paradigm, like how these 10 principles of self-sovereign identity described by Christopher Allen actually ended up being used. So
So what are there certain vendors that enterprises are picking up to either host it or to manage it? Like what's kind of like the workflow for an enterprise when they say, hey, you know what, we want to move to decentralized ID? What do you kind of tell them? What are their options?
so there are it really depends on the organization structure, their use cases and business need, of course.
Hmm.
But at the same time, there are also vendors who are offering a solution to be able to integrate, for example, issuance of verifiable credentials in a very simplistic manner where the customer client doesn't have to know about like what kind of protocols are being used or like what kind of credential format is being issued, etc. These all of these stuff is like covered with the issuance applications that can be integrated with the backend services of the organizations, so that like data regarding identity data, for example, for the customer of an organization can be pulled back from the backend services, and using the identity and access management and authorization for using the issuance service, they can basically issue these credentials to their customers. So that's one of these like more seamless integrations that can happen there.
And
But at the same, sorry.
I was gonna say, are you seeing, so one of the biggest reasons I've always been proponents is to reduce the breaches of large data, filtration. So if someone, breaks into some bank and they just say, hey, look, we just stole 1 million identities of all your customers, and we're gonna put it on the dark net for people to sell. With
Correct.
decentralized ID, one of the big promises, well, if you were decentralized and you have all these credentials stored, these breaches wouldn't be an issue. Are you seeing a decline in breaches with companies that have moved to decentralized ID?
That's a very good question. I also do think it really depends on what kind of company we're talking about, because if it's driven by data economy and maybe to a certain extent surveillance capitalism, then the
Yeah,
answer is no, because in the end of the day, not a lot of things are changing. A bank is still owning the customer data. They have to store this information as well. Just because the client gets a verifiable credential to be able to access online banking, for example, doesn't change the fact that the customer data is stored somewhere in the backend systems of a bank. I think the biggest decentralization or getting rid of the data honeypot, so to speak, is happening in the area where we're seeing the shift more from the federated identities to the self-sovereign identity approach. Meaning
okay.
that I don't have to use like this one single identity I have that is bound to, for example, Google, to access Spotify, to access like any kind of other service provider, so that in case I lose that identity, or even worse, if Google decides to deny me the service of using my own identity
Yeah.
to access these services, that this kind of censorship that wouldn't occur in the self-sovereign environment, or self-sovereign identity approach at least. And yeah, I mean, some of the companies, I think they are really looking to have as less data as possible, like for example, service providers,
Hmm.
because they don't necessarily be going for the becoming a honeypot, or like losing, being a victim of the data theft. In that sense, I think self-sovereign identity is definitely helping. And at the same time, of course, the other part is the correlation, right? Like that's one of these additional benefits of using self-sovereign identity as an approach for at least the end user, so that one single, or let's say a group of verifiers could not collide with each other to be able to correlate user information,
Are you
like,
seeing any
and
major
their
SaaS
behaviors.
providers accepting self-sovereign IDs?
What kind of provider? Sorry.
Anything like Spotify, Google, any type of, Salesforce, any type of large SaaS enterprise where they're like, oh, you can use this verified credential or self-sovereign ID this way. Have you seen that integration anywhere?
That hasn't happened yet, I would say, but I think we will get there. Eventually, we will get there. I mean, I'm not sure how things are in US. I mean, you also have the mobile driver's license on the iOS and Android devices. I think it's at least the state
It
of
might exist
California,
in California
and
for like,
Florida,
I
I
think,
think as well.
yeah, but it's not popular and not really rolled out.
Huh, I see. We always hear like it's being rolled out in California, and like we
Yeah,
always
I'm
feel the
sure
pressure
the
of
the
like, we're
press is
being late.
probably really good on how awesome they are, but yeah, I can guarantee if you go down to Florida and say, "Hey, show me your driver's license," people are going to pull out their driver's license and show it to you.
Yeah. So coming back to your question, I think it's related to the adoption. So from the point of service providers or commercial service providers, I think what the Europe is at least trying to do is to enforce is a big word, but to
Persuade.
require
Okay.
service providers to accept the European digital identity as a method of authentication to their services, for example. And I think this is also Europe's one of the bigger strengths, regulations and enforcement
Yep.
of those regulations. And therefore, I am definitely seeing in the next 2 to 3 years, we will see major US companies also offering the login with SSI options. And from the other side of the things, like more the public sector and the banking sector, public sector is already trying really hard as well to get into this identity paradigm due to also regulations and state-funded projects, etc. So I do see as well that there is going to be a major shift happening, at least in the Europe, how e-government identity and access management is being utilized.
So, do you play in
Also
the
banking,
Web3
of course.
space, like Web3 apps and things like that? Do you ever play around with those at
Yeah,
all?
sure.
Okay,
Yeah, like
so
MetaMask or
right,
yeah.
so that's kind of like I feel like I live two different internet lives. I live my corporate life, which is I have 1,000,001 usernames and passwords and MFA push notifications, where it's annoying as all hell all day long. And then I live in the Web3 space where it's, oh, connect to the website, sign, I'm in, and I'm just done. And we're at the end of it there. And it seems like this is so much easier and more efficient and safer from my perspective. Do you see that world migrating into the enterprise world, or do you think it's going to be more of the verifiable credentials method?
So we do see also quite a lot of interest from the corporate world for Web3.
Mm-hmm.
However, how the Web3 is being implemented or set into practicality is not necessarily through the public permissionless blockchain utilization. So nothing really related to Ethereum, for example, network or Solana or whatever, but more really the public permissioned networks, as we call them. So basically, the one that is with the Hyperledger Indy is the identity example of it. So there are only designated or authorized group of people can write, but everybody can read kind of networks, or also private permission networks as well are being utilized for that reason. But this is more really to create also trust between different organizations so they can cooperate better. There's a lot of area in the supply chain use cases, but going towards the end user, there are also some projects that are happening that we're looking into about offering wallet services for B2C products, where a user can also gather, for example, NFTs from one company or like another company as well, and have like a collection of their loyalty points, NFTs, and whatnot in a wallet. So there is a shift. However, still though, the mindset of being self-sovereign is, how Peter Parker's uncle said, with great power comes great responsibility. Is the same here as well, because you as the end user, if you are going for a non-custodial wallet solution, you are responsible of your own keys, you're responsible of your own backup, you're responsible for all the data that you're keeping, basically, or like or all the assets that belong to you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is still seen as a bit of a critical point for the adoption and also from the usability point of view. So therefore, these clients that I was talking to you about are also more interested in the custodial side of the things, where users can still authenticate using their username and passwords, and they have a wallet, but that's being managed by a different organization.
Kind of defeats the purpose at that point, I feel.
Kind of, right.
That's pretty awesome. So have you worked with, two new terms I've recently just learned about. I just interviewed the CEO of Spherity, who's also going to be at EIC.
Oh, Carsten Stöcker.
Yeah, I just spoke with him last week, actually. Super smart guy. And I was taking notes as he's talking. Even though it's recorded, I'm still writing things down so I can figure out what's going on.
Well, he's a physicist, so.
Yes, they made that very apparent. And two terms I learned that were new to me that aren't even just terms in Europe, but you're actively developing on, is the digital product passport and the digital twin. And I never even heard of those. And I am very much I am at the lowest level entangled with every identity vendor and enterprise in the US, and these are brand new terms to me. And I'm just all of a sudden finding out there's a whole, not just new terms, there's a whole new business vertical happening. Are you partaking in any of this stuff at all? Do you have any familiarity with it from your standpoint?
Oh yeah. So one of my current clients that I'm working with is actually in this area, the automotive data spaces that I was mentioning.
Yeah.
So do you know what data spaces are?
Let's just say no, because I know a little bit from my research, but I can guarantee you pretty much everyone else watching this doesn't.
Yeah, sure. So data spaces are basically permissioned networks where a number of organizations who have been onboarded can share data with each other while keeping their data sovereignty, as well as control over whom they share this data with. So the idea is we're not looking to gather all the data of every company into one single place, like a large database or something like that, but more saying, okay, every company keeps their own data the way it was. We just want to enable them to be able to exchange data in a very convenient manner. So that would be like a very vague, I would say, ELI 5 definition of data spaces. And in the automotive data space, there is an initiative called Catena X, which has been, I think, out there since the past 3 years. And around 80 automobile companies in Europe, as well as the suppliers and tier suppliers, are in this consortium, not consortium, but association. And they have built a network where also using the open source software that is going to be utilized to be able to enable this data sharing in a convenient manner. So here, like I mentioned, the data stays more or less the same, but there are some kind of components that are being used. Like, for example, there is a identity wallet side of the things, like I mentioned before. So a company can store their own organizational ID. So when they ask for data from a different organization, they can prove who they are. And also they can let them be authorized by the type of credentials they have. And on the other hand, there are also connectors called Eclipse Data Space Connectors or Eclipse Data Space Components, which is also an open source project by the Eclipse Foundation that enables this communication or contract requests between these two companies. And this is basically dividing or abstracting the data negotiation or like the data exchange into two levels, like one being the control plane and the other being the data plane. In the data plane, you have all the data that is in the company. It can be in a database or wherever.
Mhm.
And the control plane is having this EDC, among other things, also the identity vault that we were talking about, for enabling the exchange of data between these two companies. And coming to your question again, digital twin registry or product passport and digital twin registry, one of the core use cases of Catena X is also digital twins.
Mm.
So when, let's say, a prominent car automotive company is procuring parts from a first-tier supplier, they can send real-time data of the production of the batch about the quality of the product that they're getting, or any kind of information that might be relevant for the automotive company for making sure that the supply chain is created, first of all, but or can be traced, but also at the same time the quality of the supplied information. So whenever, I mean, and this data exchange is happening basically 24/7, and this is happening like maybe every minute. Like data is being requested by automotive company from the supplier, and the supplier delivers this information based on the authentication that occurs through the identity.
So it's almost like a data federation as opposed to an identity federation.
Yes, that's correct. So that is more like a data federation. However, it's also beyond the bit federation, because so right now what I'm talking to you about is basically rolled out in Europe, but it's actually expanding towards the US and the China and Japan as well. And there are also challenges that are being addressed there as well, like besides the legal part, of course, like legal jurisdictive challenges in terms of these legal disputes and etc. The other part is, for example, like what are the sources of truth? Like who do we trust?
How do you trust them? Because like a lot of this has to do with provenance. Like when I was speaking before about this stuff, it was like, oh, so we can show, well, all these batteries that are coming, they're coming from child-free labor mines. And it's like, well,
Right.
but how do you know? Like who's that person that says, well, I've been there, I've seen it, and I trust you, so therefore I trust this? Because I would imagine if I were to go to China and be like, hey, give me something that proves that your supply chain is, child labor free, they're like, sure, no problem. Hand over, but I don't think I'm gonna trust that 100%. So how do you instill that trust in that provenance?
Right. I mean, that is,
Is there like a
you're
Yelp
right, that's
rating,
one.
like 1 to 5 stars?
No, I mean, these companies are also being audited and also regularly, like heavily regulated in that area, especially when we're talking about like the child labor and stuff. So I think that part is really coming from the governance and compliance part of the things. But the at least the identity related challenge, or like the authentication authorization related challenge, is like, how do you trust a company to be participating in a network? So you are in the US, let's say you are Ford, and you think that you are going to get into a contract with a Chinese supplier. And this Chinese supplier has been also onboarding into the network, but the onboarding company is actually also Chinese. So you don't necessarily have like, how can you ensure that you can have a trustful relationship between these two companies? Like, how do you create that? And it is still a challenge. I really don't have an answer for it quite yet, but this is.
I've dealt with Chinese suppliers before, and it's really like, I feel like it's what I've already learned, but I know it's got to be on a larger scale, which is, you start out, you go to Alibaba, and then you get the ranks and reviews. Like, okay, then you order a small sample of a product, and then you find out it's completely garbage. And eventually you find out, okay, there's certain people you can work with that are there. They will then line you up with more quality suppliers, and you can trust them because you have more of a working relationship, and they have something on the line where their reputation is, if they were to be, found out they've been lying, then no one would be using them for business anymore. So I'd imagine something like that's just got to be bigger, kind of an enterprise level.
Yeah, absolutely. But these are challenges that are being addressed as we're actually also talking. Like these are topics that we also discuss and understand the challenges and find solutions, basically. Yeah.
I think this stuff's exciting because to me, the identity management world's been stagnant, for I think the last 10 years. It really hasn't been anything. It's just been more refinement, making things less kludgy. But what I'm seeing coming out of Europe just in the past few weeks from speaking with like you and other members that have been going to this EIC conferences, we are way behind the rest of the world and where identity and data, like data federation and sharing and supply chain provenance, all this stuff. And I think it's going to be massively important in the future, especially the provenance aspect. I think a lot of people want to know where everything has been coming from. I think they want to know the product they're buying, where, was there child labor involved and all this kind of stuff. It's been more of a conversation in the whole, the carbon neutrality aspect of things. That's a big hot topic now. Like everyone wants to talk about it, but here no one's doing anything.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like I was talking more about like this whole network is more about the B2P scenario, right? But at the same time, there's like an aspect of the B2C. So how does the customer can know that they're buying a CO2 neutral,
Right.
I don't know, T-shirt, something like that. Yeah, so that would be also very interesting to address, like how do you make it like in a secure manner? How can you create trust in your customers, basically B2C customers, using decentralized identities?
Do you think companies would be pushing back against it? Because I would think companies like Apple and these huge manufacturing companies would be like, I really don't want you looking under the hood because that's going to affect our market share.
It depends on how you represent the data.
Okay.
It's usually not about the data, how you represent it. No, I also did like around 5 years of quality management at Bosch. That was my first job. So
Oh, wow. Okay.
was using also a lot of statistics, but let's not get into details this time back in the automotive sector. But yeah, it's really about what do you want to show to your customers, and
Yeah.
companies wants to show the good
The
side
good
to their
parts, of
customers,
course.
the good parts, exactly. Because I mean, I don't know how politically correct is your podcast, but at the
Oh, we're
same
not
time,
fucking politically correct at all.
oh, great. I mean, in that case, then we can talk a bit about, for example, electric cars and batteries, right? Like
Yes.
yeah, like the nickel production, for example, is densely populated in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is
Yep.
have these mines, but at the same time, it is really, really harsh conditions for people who are working there. We don't know if there's any child labor involved or not, or what kind of minimum wage that those people get. But at the
Mhm.
same time, everybody's using an iPhone. Everybody's using a Tesla, or
Yeah.
everybody wants to use a Tesla at least.
Everyone is just behaving like this. It's like, oh, look at my cool
Exactly.
world. They only see
But
what's
yeah,
around them.
look, Apple, I'm not giving you a USB charger anymore because we're being environmentally more
Yeah.
considerate. Or I'm not gonna use like plastic packaging on my packaging, but like, yeah, that's cool. And this is what they want to show. But that was the part that I was referring to about
Yeah, they're going to show you what
also,
they want to know.
yeah, and not necessarily everything that you should know.
Yep. Yeah, I think having transparency, supply chain transparency with true provenance will change the manufacturing of pretty much everything that we use on a day-to-day basis, especially here, because I don't know about in Europe, but I feel it's a little bit different in Europe. But here I feel like Americans are just, they want the cheapest thing that's good enough, like for like a spatula. Like I just want the cheapest, but I really don't give a shit about where my spatula came from. I just need something that's going to last. It's $5, great, I'll buy that one. Or it's something that's going to be make me look cool. Like it's got to fall into one of those categories. So it's either got to be super cheap or it's got to make me look, give me, status in somewhere. And
Hmm.
I think if you start showing everybody and pushing it in front of you, like, okay, cool, yeah, you can buy the latest iPhone, you can do this, but just so you know, 3 kids died to make your phone. All of a sudden, people probably won't be so excited to buy the iPhone anymore, and they're going to be a little. It's not going to work out so well. So I
Which
don't know if we'll
reminds
get
me,
that degree, but
yeah, I don't know. So I can't find. I don't remember the website, but like back when I was in university, like 50 years ago or so. a friend of mine back then sent me a link about how many slaves are working for you.
Oh,
You could really calculate it based on the amount of shoes you have, what kind of electronics you possess, and how many clothing that you have. And based on this information, it was really delivering you some really preposterous numbers about, like, I don't know, 52 slaves have worked for your consumption, basically, something like that. And it's like,
that'd be a.
wow, that's
I
really
want
dumb.
to. That's a great website.
I didn't really question how it has been calculated honestly back then,
Yeah,
but it sounded very interesting and gave like a
it's
different
more than
approach
zero.
or like perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's probably more than zero.
yeah, and that's what's crazy is we're especially here in the States. I feel most of these people here don't leave the country, they don't travel, they don't see the rest of the world. They've never been to an impoverished nation in their life. They've never, so therefore, all they know is like for here in the U.S., poor is $15 an hour. Where that's 99% higher than the average wage in the world.
Yeah.
But no one wants to have that conversation. It's like we only want to talk about how poor we are in our country. Like forget the other people that that are making our goods for us. So I'm all for really putting everything in everyone's face. I think that people will make a lot more conscientious decisions on products that they buy, companies that they invest in. I think it'll shape the market. The question is, do these large companies that are holding on to this market share really want to allow that in? I mean, I don't know about in Europe, but in the States, these companies have powerful, powerful lobbying to the U.S. government from the federal level to prevent things from happening so that they can maintain that ownership.
I'm not sure about the B2C part, but at least in the B2B or B2G, let's say business to government, maybe
Okay.
that's the case. I think that is, at least in Europe, more achievable in terms of saying, hey, you gotta be crystal clear about your supply chains, and if you are whatever the weak part might be, you really have to declare it, or you have to prove it that whatever you have, just declare it kind of behavior. I mean that is definitely something that has been also worked on in terms of regulations as well, in
Mhm.
Germany as well as in Europe. But I think in the US as well, like you were also mentioning, for example, child labor, because that's
Yeah.
probably there's probably a regulation out there also in the US that prohibits any kind of unethical labor work that is occurring during supply chain of a product.
In the U.S., if
Yeah,
something was made outside the U.S., that doesn't matter.
right. Yeah. So that's true. So it's only within the
Yeah,
US.
we can't have our kids work on it, but we can have other kids work on it. That's fine.
Oh, I see. To be frank with you, I'm not really sure how is the coverage and the regulations in the Europe regarding that topic, whether it is only within the EU or outside of the EU. I would hope that it is also outside of the EU, but I won't be able to comment on that part.
So where do you see the world of decentralized or self-sovereign ID and just in general, like everything we've kind of been talking about, where do you see it going in the next, let's say, 3 years? How do you see like kind of an adoption kind of take place in the enterprise world?
For the enterprise world or for
Yeah.
the citizens?
From the enterprise side, like if I was a big bank, like where could I see myself, like my company be like, okay, I need to start moving towards these types of like new systems, I would say, along those lines.
Mhm. So let's start with the easier one for me because I'm already working on that area, the B2B and
Okay.
the data spaces. I think it is flying off really, really well. It's taking off. It's in its infancies, but at the same time, there is tons of interest, not only within the automotive, but also different industries like energy sectors creating their own data spaces. Manufacturing is going for their own data spaces, and like the concept of data space and data sovereignty is
Mhm.
uh, boding well with the companies at least across Europe. And I do see that the decentralized identities are also being utilized because we do have a exhibit A or a prime example of how good it can be utilized as well in this context with the Catena X and automotive data spaces. And a lot of other data spaces are trying to build up on that one. And there's also a lot of standardization going on as well in the International Data Space Association and also from the Eclipse Foundation. Regarding to your second topic with the maybe citizen IDs or like more personal identification related areas and businesses, in 2 to 3 years in Europe, they will have to adapt and adopt both at the same time. So I definitely see more issuance happening from the side of businesses, but like banks, for example, at the same time, public sector, and more consumers or verifiers in this case of these credentials from the private sector as well as public sector. So I really do see that happening. But how the question is going to be more about like how do we enable these things? Like like you said, there are like many different ecosystems. Now it's more like tailored for the Europe, for example, with the whole architectural reference framework and profiles that have been defined. But at the same time, the question is always like also about like, okay, how am I going to integrate it to my backend? And I think there, the issuer side is a bit more easy, I think, because you just find a vendor and you go with it. But like, how do you make sure that the verification is universally accepted? Mm-hmm. And therefore, the verifier applications or service offerings are going to become play a very interesting role, I think, in the future. And not only from the European side of the things, I'm more really thinking about the worldwide, because digital or the decentralized identities are already being implemented in production, for example, in Bhutan, but they were using Hyperledger Indian Aries, for example. So how can a citizen in Bhutan use their electronic ID, which is issued in Enoncreds, to apply for a visa in Europe?
Yeah, that's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, and
you're going to need a decentralized orchestration layer.
Because we will never ever get one single technology stack for decentralized identities. It's just
especially from a government perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And therefore, I think it's going to be super interesting to see also from the verifier side, like if there's going to be any kind of like notary service or any kind of verification services that's supports many different stacks, but at the same time compliant with these regulatory frameworks across the world. So I do see that there might be some of the companies who would try to address this challenge. Mm-hmm. It's a very hard problem to solve, but at the same time, I think there's also quite a lot of money to be making there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's what I'm seeing in the next 2-3 years of decentralized digital identities.
Nice. From a consultancy perspective, where do you see the big money makers being? Like what would be, if like for me, right? Like what should I get into now? Because you see like there's a lot of budgets being lined up for this in Europe. So we'll probably see that 2 years later here.
Right. So you're asking in terms of monetization of these credentials, or?
So like from a services provider, like we go in and set up identity management systems for companies, right? So when companies say, hey, we're going to move self-sovereign, we're going to do data spaces, we want to do digital passports, where are you seeing kind of the larger requirements from a services provider being needed in those spaces? So like you're with Accenture, right?
Yeah.
So where is Accenture being asked, hey, I need you to come in and help us with this X problem that we're having regarding these decentralized type of credentials and stuff?
Right. I mean, this happens through, yeah, I mean, either the clients willing to offer some kind of new services to their customers, or being compliant with some kind of regulations, or bringing their technology to the next level, depending on whatever that they're after. We do come up with like some of our like showing about the business capabilities and tech capabilities of decentralized identities, and try to find the best possible solution for their problem. and offer also system integration with the vendors that we work together with, that we partner up with across the whole globe, basically.
Nice.
So I think in the consultation area, system integration is one of the bigger money makers, in my opinion.
Makes sense.
The question, though, is I think also still the billion-dollar question, not the million, is how do you bring added value in terms of monetization using identity? Because identity and access management, I mean, you're much better expert than I am. I got into the train with SSI and then start looking into federated identities, centralized identities. I was
going backwards.
Yeah, exactly. I was going backwards. But at the same time, I mean, how do you make money with it? Like, how do you offer opportunities to customers and clients that want to adopt this technology? Like, what is the drive there? Because, for example, so we try to look into the area of, for example, billing and monetization, and like having some kind of trust networks, and trying to offer a high level of assurance credentials with a high level of trust bestowed upon them, and create like a network, a trust network, where these participants can be onboarded into the network to be able to issue or verify the credentials, but at the same time have some kind of a system also decentralized or at least distributed in terms of who's doing what with these credentials to be able to monetize them as well. Because if you're an issuer and if you're getting into it, why are you going to give up your identity provider?
Yeah.
The source of all the information out there and the source of control. What is the added?
That's the thing
benefits?
right there, is giving up the control. I think that's the part that's going to take convincing. And I think for me, the only way I see to convince someone to give up control is to say by giving up control, you're also relinquishing the added risk of maintaining it. So if you don't own it, you can't be held accountable if something bad were to happen. But I don't know. We'll see, I guess.
Yeah.
So, well, hey, I want to thank you for this call. This has been amazing. I've learned a lot again, and I can't wait to meet you in Berlin at EIC. Do you have any projects or anything going on, or do you want to kind of tell people about or anything before we wrap up?
Well, I mean, I will be talking at EIC about the role of self-sovereign identity in the automotive data spaces, a bit of the things that we talked about today. So yeah, looking forward to go there and have that conversation, and also meet you as well and some other industry experts.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm 7 feet tall, so you'll see me floating around.
So that's always very interesting, because you never know how tall a person is until like on Zoom calls, for example. I was sometimes very much surprised about the size of people when I see them live after COVID lockdowns and everything. And some of them look like, wow, you're taller than I expected.
That's awesome. Cool, man. Well, hey, I'll see you in Berlin.
Yeah, sounds good.
Hey everyone, you going to Identiverse this year, May 28th and 29th in Las Vegas? We're going to be there, and we're going to make it awesome. How? We're having a scavenger hunt where you can win awesome prizes, hats, cool bottle opener, butterfly knives, awesome whiskey stones that are all custom branded, leather posters, a real weapon, and cool fun stuff like an invite to our private party. The way that you're going to find it is find these little poker chips all over the convention, tap your phone to them, and that's how you're going to start the scavenger hunt. Lots of cool prizes, and not everyone's going to be able to make it. Hope you can do it. I'll see you guys there. Later.